So before I was the amazing YouTube host that you see before you today, I worked a minimum wage job at a donut shop.
This is the actual shirt that I wore when I worked there for
2 years. Now, the job had obvious perks. Oh, would you look at that? Just like these right here. But the pay? Oh, sorry, hold on. The pay? That wasn't so great. This is great. Minimum wage is the absolute lowest wage that the law allows a business to pay a worker. Nationally, the US government has that set at a number of $7.25 an hour, and it's been that way for 10 years. But my job was in Oakland, California, which passed its own minimum wage law, so I got $12.25 an hour. So if I got paid $5 an hour more than the federal minimum wage, isn't that a good thing? Well, Oakland is part of the Bay Area, which is one of the most expensive places in the entire country. I'm talking $7 coffees and $1,500 a month to rent a bedroom. No, not an apartment, the bedroom. No kitchen, no living room, just one room with 4 other people also renting a room. That's crazy. That's why I still live with my mom. Thanks, Mom. Now, if I had that same job at a donut shop in, say, Houston, Texas, I'd be getting $7.25 an hour because that's what the minimum wage is there. And that brings us to the never-ending minimum wage debate. Some think $7.25 an hour is way too low to survive on no matter where you live, even if where you live is cheap. They want to raise it to $15 an hour, so no matter what city or state you work in, you can't make less than that. Others think that the minimum wage isn't designed for people to survive on. It's supposed to be an entry-level wage for workers with no skills to get a foot in the door, gain skills, and then quickly move on to higher paying jobs. Raising it could force businesses to fire workers and raise their prices, which could hurt the economy. So, should the US raise the federal minimum wage? The reason people are talking about the minimum wage today is because of what happened 7 years ago in late 2012. Hundreds of fast food workers in New York City walked off their jobs, demanding better pay. The reason? Minimum wage wasn't enough to get by on. Those strikes snowballed into the Fight for 15 movement, which went national and pushed to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour. Democrats in the House of Representatives took notice. They recently passed a bill that would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024. But Republicans in the Senate have no plans on taking up the bill. And President Trump has threatened to veto it if it ever does pass. So it pretty much has zero chance of passing right now. But if you really want to understand the minimum wage debate, you gotta go back even earlier, to the late 1800s. Historians called it the Gilded Age. Business was booming, but there was massive inequality. Almost all the money was going to the people at the top, dudes with top hats and monocles who owned the railroads and most of the businesses, and Boardwalk and Park Place. And we all know you just can't win when someone owns Boardwalk and Park Place. Basically, these guys had all the power and didn't pay their workers well at all. In 1890, the average American made $380 a year. That's $11,019. That could get you what, maybe 3 months worth of rent in San Francisco? Maybe? When the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to do something about inequality. In 1938, Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set the first ever national minimum wage at 25 cents an hour, which would equal about $4.45 today. Since that time, Congress has increased the minimum wage 22 times. The current level of $7.25 was last set in 2009 when President Obama signed it into law. And that's what makes the minimum wage debate in the US different. Many other countries tie the minimum wage to inflation. See, as time passes, money is worth less. $100 in 1900 could buy way more than $100 could today. So tying minimum wage to inflation means that it increases automatically every year or two so that it doesn't lose its value. The US requires a new law every time to raise the minimum wage. That means the House, Senate, and the President all have to sign off on it, and they don't agree on stuff that often. That's why we have the same minimum wage we've had for the last 10 years. And over that time, it's lost 16% of its value. That $7.25 an hour is now worth $6.10 an hour. Now, here's where things get a little complicated. States, counties, and even cities can pass laws to set their own minimum wage. It just has to be equal to or greater than the federal minimum wage. For example, in California, it's $12 an hour, but in the city of San Francisco, it's over 15. Looking at the country as a whole, 21 states have a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. But in the other 29 states plus DC, there's a higher minimum wage. And then there are counties and cities peppered throughout with their own minimum wages. For many supporters, raising the minimum wage is a basic issue of fairness in a society where income inequality keeps rising. They think putting more money in the pockets of low-wage workers is an effective way to reduce poverty. Let's look at the numbers. $7.25 an hour works out to $58 a day if you work 8 hours. So if you work 5 days a week, every week, nonstop for an entire year, you'd make a little over $15,000. Check out this poverty chart from the federal government. A worker supporting a family of 2 would be almost $2,000 below the poverty line. So, what happens if you raise their wages to $15 an hour? A report from the Congressional Budget Office calculated that it would boost the pay of 27 million workers and it would lift 1.3 million people above the poverty line. It's also important to understand who the typical minimum wage worker is. An old stereotype is that they're mostly just teens in high school who need a little extra spending cash. Now, it is true that teens make up a big chunk of minimum wage workers, but more than half are over 25. A lot of these workers make so little money that they qualify for some form of government assistance like food stamps or housing support. One study by the Economic Policy Institute found that for every dollar the minimum wage is increased, spending on government assistance drops by $5.2 billion. So if companies had to pay their workers more, it would actually save the government money. Now, it's one thing to talk about increasing the minimum wage in theory, but what does it actually look like on the ground? To figure that out, we hit the streets of San Francisco, which has one of the highest minimum wages in the country at $15.59 an hour. We talked to a 25-year-old who makes slightly above that at a local supermarket, and the owner of multiple packing and shipping stores who employs minimum wage workers. He's also the president of a local merchants association that was against raising the minimum wage in San Francisco.
If my pay was $7.25 now, at this point, then it would be very difficult. I would probably be working 7 days a week, 6 days a week, and really having to penny pitch, and really learn how to budget, But now that I'm making a little bit more money, it gives me a little bit, playroom, a little bit time to stretch. But it makes me able to do more things.
The business owner has a slightly different take on raising the minimum wage.
In the worst case scenario, from my opinion, is that if minimum wage goes too high, you're going to see a lot of companies consider other options, eliminating the human. My response to that is I invested in a lot of technology, which reduced a lot of the labor-intensive parts of my business. So I wound up hiring less people. And now I employ a lot less people and I have more locations. So the net effect is I'm employing less people.
And this brings us to the major argument against raising the federal minimum wage. A lot of people think it'll kill jobs. Think about it. Increasing the minimum wage means businesses have to spend more money to pay their employees. And not every business is like Amazon or Apple with endless amounts of money. Many are small mom and pop shops, so they might have to cut back on employee hours or lay people off. Economists have been arguing for decades about whether or not raising the minimum wage kills jobs. Many agree that a small increase won't, but going from $7.25 to $15 is not small. It's more than double. A report from the Congressional Budget Office predicts that a $15 minimum wage could force employers to lay off 1.3 million workers. And if you're a teen, sorry, but they're usually the first to go because they have the least amount of skills and it's just not cost effective to pay them a high wage to essentially learn on the job. If we did increase the minimum wage, some economists worry about what that would do to the economy. With higher wages, many businesses would have to raise their prices to pay for it. Over time, that can increase the cost of living, and low-wage workers might be back to square one, where everything's too expensive compared to how much money they're making.
Somehow people thought that, hey, you're going to raise the minimum wage and everyone's going to have more money, but you don't realize that, okay, well, someone's making $10 an hour and his wage goes up to 15. Well, that hamburger that he's been buying for $10 now is probably going to go up to $12 or $13, provided that nothing else goes up other than the minimum wage.
Other businesses might do the opposite. They might do the math, figure they can't afford the higher wages, and just shut down. All right, you've heard the major arguments for and against raising the minimum wage. There are a lot of potential pluses and potential minuses, and even experts disagree. But what do you think we should do, and why? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like crunching numbers, check out an episode we did all about universal basic income. And for all you teachers, if you want to bring this topic into the classroom, check us out on our website, KQED Learn. I'm your host, Miles Best. Peace out, blessings, hugs and kisses. I'm gonna go finish the rest of those donuts. See you later.